Welcome, Talisa. Thank you for joining us. We're talking in context of critical race theory and its ban in Idaho. It's always interesting when freedom of speech is emphasized so much for few, but then when we look from the lens of racism, the same people who promote free speech attack that back through these bans and legal attacks. So we have Talisa Ramos. She's professor of social work at Elizabethtown College and is also involved with multiple projects in Millersville University and teaches multicultural counseling skills. So thank you, Talisa, for joining us. Educate us about this critical race theory. What is it? And where are we with these bans and divisiveness?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Majeed, for having me here today. I appreciate you reaching out. This is such a needed conversation right now, as many have been hearing, right? We've been hearing a lot in the news right now, and also within politics surrounding critical race theory, right? One thing I think in regards to conversation, because for me, I'm a social worker by nature, right? So it's really, really big that I also practice and promote active listening. And in these discussions, I try to really get a deeper understanding of opposing views, of views that might challenge what my framework is, right? And just trying to seek knowledge in regards to where others stand. And then these discussions that I've been having surrounding the idea of critical race theory is that it is a new concept, but let me tell you, it is not. And we saw the emergence of critical race theory actually come out of the academy, particularly law school, with a group of dedicated law students surrounding diversity and inclusion, but more so that it's not training. And I think that's also a narrative that's been kind of permeating the media surrounding, diversity and inclusion training, and it's connected to critical race theory. Critical race theory is not a training, right? It's a practice, and it's integrating race and racism in society that really, emerged in and through scholarship. So Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a critical race theorist, right? She notes that it's not a noun, that critical race theory is a verb, right? So it's not static and it's not a narrow definition, but it's considered to be evolving as we continue to explore the complexities surrounding race, especially within the United States.
One thing that many critics say that critical race theory divides people and it says everybody's racist. Do you want to clarify that, Mrs.?
Yeah, and I think that has been a big narrative that has really taken off with the House Bill 377, right? That there's this discussion that, it's divisive and it teaches discrimination. And I'll be honest with you, that can't be far from the truth, that completely. And really what critical race theory does, it critiques, right? How the social construction of race and institutionalized racism perpetuates a racial caste system, and that it really relegates people of color to the bottom. And so when we're utilizing critical race theory, we're really looking to amplify the voices of individuals of color and marginalized identities so that they are heard, right? Because within society and within the history of the United States, it has been from the perspective of a dominant culture, which is those who are white.
So critical race theory is not limited to diversity training. It is not a training. It's a study of race and how it is affecting all of our society. So it's just study. So why people are saying that it is dividing us? They don't want us to study race, or they say it doesn't exist. Why object to that, studying race?
And actually, you know, I study a lot and I follow up with a lot of the critical race theorists and those who are really doing the work, like in the academy, right? Like individuals like Professor Glenn Bracey, who really, and I follow his work and his discussion surrounding critical race theory. And he discusses how race theory, critical race theory specifically, you know, and even the idea of race is socially constructed, right? And it's not natural, it's not biological, but it's a social construct. And you know that even though it's a social construct in our society, it has social effects because people put weight on it. And you know, go ahead, were you going to say something?
When you say social construct, could you explain, because people generally feel that genetically the race is determined genetically. And one example that comes to my mind is Islamophobia, even though Islam is not a race, but people clump all of that together and use that same lens to view all Muslims as one race, or they assign, even though it's not true. But what's the element of genetic and biological versus all social construct?
You know, really determination, like when you're going into the biology of it, right? The blessing of active melanin in your skin, you know, but the thing is, there's the biological, right? Yeah, we could talk about the activation of melanin, right? Like the skin tones and the different variations that one have, particularly within the Black race, with other races, right? However, and the phenotype, right? But then there's this social construct that has been really embedded in the framework of our country, and since its inception, right? With slavery. And that the Black race, or those who are not dominant, right? And even like looking into like indigenous or Native American race, that they are lesser than those who are white. And that's when I'm talking about the social construct, I'm talking in regards to the categorization of race. Not so much the phenotype, right? Like the visual that we see, right? But more so the social categorization that society has imposed on us. So that's what I mean when I say social construct, right? And I also want to point out too, because one of the, you know, big tenets when it comes to critical race theory is the idea surrounding intersectionality, right? Is that we all have different identities, right? Depending on where we lie, and that it's also important that we understand that the diversity within those different identities, right? And understanding.
Do you want to expand on that, like those different identities with intersectionality?
Yeah. So when we're looking into intersectionality, a lot of the times we're coming from the framework, looking into the marginalized identities that one hold, correct? So for example, in my intersectionality, I identify as a woman. Right? And also I identify as a Latina woman, as a woman of color, from Puerto Rico. So in that sense, my own social location and experience may differ from an individual who is a white woman, right? Not saying that they have not experienced possibly discrimination due to their gender, right? Because they're a woman and we may have shared those experiences, but also to understand the complexities that comes along with my experience too, because on top of me being a woman, I am also a woman of color. I am a Latina in the United States, right? So understanding the intersectionality within those.
Right. And that's where the concept of affirmative action with more, if you have more marginalized, why is that threatening to people who have dominance?
Yeah. I think, to be honest with you, I can give you a couple different perspectives, right? As a and it's hard for me to tear this away. But as a clinician, I think that there is some extension of guilt there, right? That I have been given, or I have been born with these unearned privileges that sets me apart from individuals who may not have been born with my skin, right? Or with other privileges that I have been able to gain access to, such as healthcare, education, things of that sort. So I like to think of it in regards to, and I connect with my mentor a lot on this. A lot of our discussions talk about the psychology of diversity and inclusion, right? Because when we are talking about these topics, our identity comes into play. So our emotions come along with that. So a lot of the times when we see somebody so resistant to the idea of critical race theory, it in part has to deal with their identity development and where they are in regards to their journey within social justice, right? Within restorative practices, and how they are rooted within their identity and their experiences as well.
So I think that for the sake of this particular discussion, I fully understand, but let me...
You want to go a different way?
Right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
As if you were explaining to me who hasn't read or studied or understood these concepts. So from a blue collar white male perspective, he comes across these words as white privilege and he says, like, what are you talking about? I have to work hard. I have to do all these things. And I'm getting just ends meet barely by working hard. So this concept of white privilege sounds very foreign to them, or sounds more like, well, I don't have any privilege from their standpoint. So do you want to elaborate what that entails, how they might not know, those who don't know?
Yeah, and there has been really, I have engaged in a lot of discussions surrounding that, right? Especially within Central Pennsylvania. I've connected with a lot of individuals who said, look, Talisa, I get it, right? I hear what you're saying. At the same time, how can you tell me that I'm privileged when I grew up in poverty, right? When I didn't have access to a college education, but you do. And, you know, how can you say that I live this privileged life because I am white, when I have worked so hard for everything that I have achieved, and nothing was handed to me? And that's a conversation that I've had with many individuals where they're like, I can't really wrap my mind around what you're saying. Like, I hear you, but I just can't agree. And I think when it comes to this idea of earned and unearned privileges, and that's where that intersectionality comes into play, when we're looking specifically at race and the salient needs of a community or communities regarding their race, that individuals who are of color and who have been marginalized historically, and when I say that, historically marginalized identities or communities, when we're thinking about privilege, this unearned privileges, being in a space and having a white identity and being able to have doors that may be open to you, that are not for people of color, due to institutional racism or discrimination, due to systemic issues that have come from generations and generations before, right? Due to laws and policies that have really been birthed and based surrounding race and the categorization, the social construct of race. So when we're talking about race and white privilege, and I say that, you know, you're a person who is white and you have white privilege, I'm not saying or negating the difficult experiences that you have had due to impoverishment, right? Or like lower socioeconomic class, or any other personal experiences. I'm specifically talking from a race lens when we talk about white privilege and the privilege that comes with being white within the United States, that it is the dominant culture,
right,
and legislation, policies, right? Even the ideas surrounding professionalism have been the pillars of what the United States has created. And those who are outside of that group have to assimilate to that, which causes issues, right? Lack of access, lack of opportunities. That's where that white privilege comes into play.
Got it. So basically, the class difference is different in along different races, and we are not particularly looking at that class difference when we are looking necessarily just focusing on the race. We're not looking at all of the world's injustices. We're narrowing down, looking at one area, and one thing doesn't mean race indifferences doesn't mean there are not other classifications and other injustices, but we don't have to make them maybe parallel. Maybe a white person went through a lot of suffering and misery because of the way system was designed, but for people of color, that whole system is designed in a very complex, far more complex way. They have to climb way too many ladders from the generations of trauma. And I think that you're not negating the suffering that a white person might go through, but you're looking at there has been these generations of layers of trauma and oppression, and many things that a white person might not know what a person of color goes through. All of those things count in there, even to the point of walking in the park, driving somewhere, or going to the neighborhood you want to without feeling somebody's just going to come, or law enforcement person is going to just come with these recently more highlighted, but have been there for a long time, these incidences of police brutality. Even those things are not experienced by white, and so many other examples that exist for people of color. And you're just saying from critical race theory, you're not negating others' suffering. You're just saying there have been all these people,
yes,
who have been just going through these painful experiences, and we need to look at it, study it through these critical race theory, understand, validate. You're not asking for anything else, right? So why does that feel like dividing? That should feel more like understanding for what it is. So why do people say that label would threaten unity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought that together so well, Salman. I just wanted to say that real quick. You brought that together so well. And that's why the importance of intersectionality is so important, right? To understand that because of our particular identities that we have, right? And depending on our social locations, that your experiences will be different. And it's not necessarily negating one's troubles that they've had or the difficulties and traumas that they have faced. So thank you so much for saying that. That's super important. And I think, when it comes to thoughts surrounding divisiveness, right? I think a big portion of that stems from change too, right? And if I take a step back and I reflect on this past year, in the pandemic and everything that has been happening, there has been almost as if like a racial justice, like some type of reckoning within the United States. And we've seen it play out this summer through protests. We've seen it through marches. A lot of individuals even taking to social media and media spaces, really highlighting and bringing to light the injustices surrounding, the discrimination, the systemic issues within law enforcement, within law in general, and legislation that has been proposed, right? But this is the United States. And for many, this is the United States that they have known and they have grown up in for years, right? So now there's this midst of self-reflection that is happening. And then also this idea and push for change that needs to occur, right? What's the purpose of all of the protesting, of all of the education that, social justice leaders have been really pushing up to the forefront, is because we want change, right? We want to see equity within all myriad forms, but also embedded in our culture in the United States, right? Because we know from history, from past experiences, from stories that have been passed along by our ancestors and our generations that this is not new, that this is not new issues, but dominant culture has really pushed this aside, right? And to a sense, it's really shaking up the core identity of the United States, but also the core identity of individuals. So everything that they grew up to know about, certain holidays, certain achievements of individuals, particular things that they have learned within their education system, now all of that is being challenged. And I think, there is concern and a bit of, being uncomfortable in these conversations and engaging in them. And a lot of the times what I hear is, well, like, this is America. This is, and we have a strong history, and, we're such a great nation, and we need to be proud of our country and things of that sort. And I think, for some, depending on your identity, honestly, depending on your identity and where your family has, come into or grown in regards to their success within the American dream. And I put quotation marks because, for some of us, we aren't living the American dream.
Right. This is definitely very helpful and insightful. And I know we're just getting to start this conversation, and I think we need to continue this and have many more of these conversations. I'll ask your concluding remarks in the second.
Yeah.
That the key I am also understanding from our conversation is, rather than the label of this being divisive, it is not. It's like saying a person who got hurt while they're complaining, saying you complaining is disrupting my peace. So that's where, rather than being defensive, listen. And same thing while on one hand for free speech, so much of hate speech is allowed under that, just because that's the sound of the dominant voice attacking a minority or some smaller group, and that is considered like, all right, well, that's their right. But same thing when minorities talk or express, or in this case for this study of critical race theory or similar topics, or when there is minority speaking up, there is a sound of like, all right, you need to stop. You need to then there is all these attacks or bans or laws. So there's that hypocrisy in that whole theme. And I think there is more harmony and there is more unity in understanding these processes, giving them the due place, and that allows us to move forward. Fighting that only makes things more complex and stuck and worse for the trauma, particularly. Validation itself goes a long way. So Talisa, what are your concluding remarks for our viewers?
So, oh my, and I could go on and on discussing this, right? And I think I really want to encourage others to lean into those uncomfortable discussions. You mentioned something, that's on in a lot of people's minds, like surrounding this idea of, bringing up these discussions creates more divisiveness. And I really want to push heavy against that. And I want to say, in order for us to be more unified, right? In order for us to really be a United States, it's going to be looking to our brothers and our sisters, those who do not look like us, who do share completely different experiences as a citizen in the United States. And I understand that that is maybe challenging a lot of the work or education that you grew up with. And to an extent, it's going to cause unlearning of those teachings that were placed upon you, right? And even though it feels uncomfortable, that is when we know change occurs. And in order for us to move together, especially as a nation, but just as a community, right? I care about my neighbor, right? I care about the individuals who I'm working with. I care about the patients who I treat. I care about my students. And it's important for me that I challenge myself, even if I might not share the same experience, to learn. And it involves engaging in these conversations. It involves doing self-reflection, and looking up and reading, and maybe even listening to podcasts and other forms of learning that we're not always exposed to, or that we are really always engaging in. So my advice would be is to lean into the uncomfortable conversations, and allow your conversations to be guided with love and compassion. Because I think as you have closer discussions with individuals who are different than you, you'll also find those commonalities that you can pull from as well, and really build a framework for understanding and restorative practice.
That is a powerful message. Thank you so much. And we would love to hear from you guys. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. And Talisa, we got to meet soon again.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.